Now I realize that the more you try and sell something and the more you stand on a fucking pedestal and you shout to the rooftops about how great the future of music is and blockchain technology, you just turn people off, man. We need to take a year plus, 2 years plus to really develop an organic culture and community here. Let's authentically document what's going on here. Let's give people the opportunity to really tell their stories in a very true and organic manner. And if these people are doing things that are significant enough, that will break through, because that's just how the world and how the algorithms work. So it's really just a repetition game into finding like what is that through line and what is that secret sauce that can connect with the wider audience without us pushing it on them in the first place.
Yeah, I do not wear my heart on my sleeve. I can't let them see in too deep, cause I know they can use it against me. Only one I can trust is me. I got niggas I keep around.
Episode 22 of the Invest in Music podcast. We are here with a quarterly recap. Today I sit in with my co-host DEEGAN and we talk about the Invest in Music podcast. We cover everything from our genesis to where we are today. We cover the Invest in Music team, where we're going in the future, and what to look out for in the months to come. As a reminder, you can collect this episode on investinmusic.xyz. It's the best way to support us. So without further ado, let's get into it. Episode 22 with the Invest in Music quarterly recap. All right, we are here today for the Invest in Music quarterly recap. We got the man behind the camera, DEEGAN, here with me today.
Hello, it feels good to be on the other side.
That's right. So we wanted to do a special episode today. We've done 20 plus podcasts at this point in time. So we really just wanted to update everyone on Invest in Music, really talk about the genesis, where it all started, give people a rundown about why we're even doing this podcast in the first place, and then really just talk about how we've evolved as an outlet to try and cover on-chain music in the best way possible. So I guess before we dive into that, DEEGAN, why don't you give a quick background on yourself?
Me, I am a artist, singer, songwriter, producer, performer, video editor, podcast editor for Invest in Music. It's been a fun ride so far. We've got a lot of really cool guests, a lot of different backgrounds, whether it's the music side of Web3 or the business side of Web3, managers, artists. Yeah, I've been learning a lot and having a lot of fun being behind the camera, but this is the first time on the other side, so it's been a good journey so far.
It's been a great journey. You've been phenomenal. I want to dive right into it and just talk to people a little bit more about Invest in Music. I got a little agenda here that we're going to go through, so it's going to be a little bit more of a structured episode than what we normally do, which is completely run it off the cuff. But to kick things off, what is Invest in Music? So for those who have been listening to this podcast, you probably know we're very passionate about on-chain music, and the tagline we have here is where fans turn to collectors. And so basically the reason why I wanted to start this is there's a lot of people that are very unfamiliar with what on-chain music looks like. You know, there's quite a lot of content to cover out there, and hopefully through this podcast, you've been able to follow along with the stories that come with on-chain music, the people that are involved with it. As DEEGAN mentioned, you know, the artists, the founders, the collectors, and really just allowing this to be a place where you can kind of follow along with the journey of on-chain music as a whole. And so I guess to really just dive into that, what that means for me is I wanted to give a quick background on how this all started. So for those who have been following this for a long time, you may know that prior to Invest in Music, it was actually called This Week in Music NFTs. That was a weekly newsletter that I was writing to cover the music NFT ecosystem, writing about songs, stories, and artists, etc. But before that, This Week in Music NFTs actually stemmed from a newsletter I was writing called This Week in DeFi. This Week in DeFi was when I was covering different DeFi projects, different DeFi outlets. This was around 2018, 2019 DeFi summer. And basically the reason I started This Week in Music NFTs, which became Invest in Music, was to really just put a spotlight on a culture that I thought was very exciting. You know, prior to ever getting into crypto, I was a journalist. I was writing for blogs like This Song Is Sick, doing a lot of up and coming coverage of artists in Colorado. And there was something very special about that blog culture. I don't know if you ever had a relationship with it back in the day, but I know that music blog culture was something that was really pivotal to kind of the SoundCloud era in music. And I think a lot of the intention here was to try and bring that back to on-chain music.
Yeah, as an artist, I remember trying to get my songs on playlists, not even editorials, but playlists that were either created on SoundCloud or Spotify by users. You'd go through Submit Hub, and if you could get the playlist and the journalist writing about your thing, you would basically write a summary of your song, and then they would copy and paste that into the article. Yeah, and kind of just like reword it a little bit, and then like, you know, sometimes it'd be from like other countries, so things would be like misspelled, and be like, I don't even know why I did this, but like getting like the really good articles on you, you know, would be really important, stuff like that. Lyrical Lemonade and stuff like that. I've had some of those.
Exactly. And I think for me, trying to create an outlet that embodied that culture for this new space is very important. You know, on-chain music is obviously very early right now. I don't think it's anywhere near as big as SoundCloud was at the peak of blog culture, but being able to allow blogs to have a voice in this new emergent space is very important to me. And, especially for where we're at today, where it's very difficult to find collectors and to get your songs heard in the small ecosystem that exists today, I think that outlets like Invest in Music, shout out Ziggy Music, Rob, or Where Music's Going. There's all these kind of different outlets that are starting to cover the early stages of the on-chain music ecosystem. And I think it's really important that we have a diverse set of voices so that artists such as yourself can have different places to submit their music and have it be heard by kind of the general public.
I've had experiences with Noise, Adam, and yourself, and this Invest in Music. Actually, before it was Invest in Music, the weekly. What is
This Week in Music NFTs.
Yeah, this week in Music NFTs, and it's nice having like different perspectives and different writers. We like actually honing in and like taking the time to like craft out their own art, which is like the coverage of this scene and everything like that. Having the unique perspective is pretty dope.
Totally. Yeah. Shout out High Frequency from Noise.
Mm-hmm.
Wallace is an incredible writer over there.
Yeah.
They do such a good job with their curation. And yeah, I mean, it's just nice to see that there is some early stages where if you're interested in learning about this ecosystem, there's a pocket of people who are really taking it seriously and covering it as its own unique space, which is, in my opinion, what it is. It's a new generation of artists in music.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel transitioning from doing it from DeFi and then doing it on your own with Weekly, and then now coming into here, having a team of people like myself and Michael and Hannah and Sebastian? Like, what is that transition like for you when you're like going to expand something like this that's like your vision originally, and then now you have like the team of people helping you out?
I think it's about just making it more formal and more structured.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been a process to learn about how to put a team behind an outlet that is obviously very small in its totality right now. I look to projects like Bankless, like the Defiant, DeFi Pulse. These are all outlets that I was super, super involved with during DeFi summer. And I always found it so impressive how they were running it as an organization, as a company. And I think for me, writing a week letter every week, the discipline and the consistency of that was very important. But I think I just saw an opportunity when I was like, okay, what are the early stages of music and blog culture going to look like in this new space? And I think to really allow that to reach its full potential, it was very clear to me that needed to have just more mind share behind it. And so I'll be the first to say that we are still figuring it out. We get on our weekly calls and we have a lot to even talk about in this episode, but it was a very necessary maturity. And I think that in a lot of ways, it just expanded the design space for what was possible. And I think even things like this podcast would not be possible without a team. So I'm just very thankful for the opportunity.
Yeah. And after like launching in March, and now we're headed into the middle of August, going into September, got 20 weeks under your belt. Like, what do you think you've like learned the most or like had the most perspective changing thing since you've like started on this journey with Invest in Music?
Keeping up with the entire story in real time is very difficult, and it's obviously very curated and very opinionated. Like as an outlet, I think that you need to take a very intentional stance on what you believe to be the source of all this culture. There's so many different stories out there. There's so many different songs, and I think the challenge is remaining agnostic and trying to provide an unbiased view on the space as a whole, but also offering your opinion, because I think that in a lot of ways, offering your opinion is what drives culture, what drives taste. And so I think that the biggest challenge has been, it's been 20 weeks. There's been so much that happened. Who are we putting on the podcast this week? How is it relevant to something that's happening in the space as a whole? And then beyond that, is it actually relevant, or is it only relevant because we think it's relevant?
Yeah.
And so trying to find that through line of content, guests, and really just episodes that are very like fitting in sort of the wider zeitgeist. I think that's been the challenging thing, is how do you thread that needle in a very authentic way?
Yeah. And do you value more like your bias because that's what makes you you, or do you value more like covering it on a non-biased kind of set of terms? I guess not biased, but like, you have to have a little bit of personality in what it is that you find interesting so that you have passion for the content that you're making. But also you have to be fair, and you have to be like, have a bird's eye view of the whole situation,
I'm going to give a big shout out to Sebastian here. I'd say that Sebastian has been the biggest help in helping me remain as unbiased and, see the whole view as much as possible. I'm a very opinionated person. I have artists that I really love. I have projects that I really love. And I think that me uniquely, having a unique position on the space is one thing, but I think it's about finding that balance between my individual bias on what I find to be like the most compelling in the space, and then still authentically representing everything else that's out there. And look, we're never going to get it completely right. There is no one right answer for it, but I do think that I'm very proud of the story we've told so far. And my hope with Invest in Music at large is that if you zoom out 2 years from now and you go back to our episode 1 and you start to listen to our podcast in its totality, that you will get a very authentic representation of what this entire culture looked like. And 100%. I think that's what I view success as.
Yeah, true.
Should we do some key stats here?
Yeah, for sure.
So for those of you that have been listening, we're 20 episodes in at this point. I just want to quickly give us a little bit of a highlight of what's going on. So as DEEGAN alluded to, we launched in March. We have 20 episodes recorded so far. Invest in Music is currently the 7th largest curator on sound. We've referred 95 songs to people that have gone on to mint 670 editions. So I find that very, very important because that really is the genesis and the source of what we're doing here. Putting you on to great music, putting you on to great projects, and allowing people to collect that. Quick shout out to Mirror. We have about 12,000 subscribers on Mirror. We have 5,000 subscribers on Substack. And I'd love to just highlight for a second the importance of that because we have more subscribers on Mirror, which is an on-chain media publication, than we do on Substack, which is the traditional newsletter outlet that everybody knows.
Yeah. So that really goes to test the impact that Web3 is having and how the community is so involved. And, it's not just something that's an outside source or whatever coming in, looking in. It's the people that we are catering to are actually interacting and finding their place, getting the information from these places that are really care,
Yeah. And it's something that I struggle with a lot because I know that a big intention of what we're all doing is trying to allow this space to reach a mainstream audience. And so when I hear about something like Mirror having twice as many subscribers as Substack, it's really interesting because I think in a lot of ways what I'm realizing is that our core audience, people who are listening to this episode, that have listened to 20 episodes, they're all deeply, deeply entrenched in sort of the on-chain music ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so I think starting to recognize that when it comes to our audience, I've been vocal internally that I'm not as worried about us trying to go viral on Instagram or TikTok quite yet because I think we're still figuring out what our repertoire looks like with sort of the mainstream public.
Yeah.
Obviously, they don't love the word NFT. Obviously, there's a lot of baggage there. But I do think it's very important to highlight that we care a ton about the fact that we have twice as many subscribers on Mirror because I think being a forward on-chain media organization and really wearing that as a badge is something that I feel very passionately about. And I'm very glad to say that our stats kind of reflect that in terms of what we value as being signal for our success and our growth.
Besides numeric stats and things like that, what are other goals and other accomplishments that you feel proud of just as a whole in the Invest in Music spirit, I guess I could say?
I just love when people reach out to me and they say that their episodes that we did meant something to them. You know, a lot of people that DM me and just be like, hey, I listened to this episode. I learned a lot. Or I found that was a really great conversation. And, it's funny because I never listen back to podcasts that I'm on or that I'm interviewing. So it's just a very real time conversation. So knowing that these conversations have transcended and allowed people to learn something from them, I've been very intentional about wanting this to be a space where people can feel very comfortable talking about very deep and intimate topics, whether it be fundraising or product development or artist development or whatever it might be. And so I'm really glad that we're able to get into these spaces where you can really see behind the scenes on some of these different artists and these founders in a very intentional way. And I think that that's kind of been the most rewarding thing outside of the numbers. Yeah. And
you have such a good way of building these interpersonal relationships with whether you're the founder or you are a supporter or someone who helps invest and fund. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of relationship that you've had with the people who have helped you out and the people that you help out? Just kind of give a overview of how these things kind of come to place, because a lot of people have questions about that, how do I get funding? How do I do this? How do I do that?
It's a great question. I'm going to take it back for a second to my early relationship with crypto, because I think it shows a very clear picture of how I got to the place of becoming an investor and making these decisions and having these relationships. So when I got into the space, I was just a happy kid that was going into Telegram groups and buying a bunch of shit coins. I would find a token that was on Twitter that people were excited about, and I would join a chat group and talk about how excited I was about that. That quickly evolved into me learning how to be a contributor for these different projects. And so I mentioned This Week in Music NFTs, This Week in DeFi. When I was doing journalism work, I started to evolve from just being a participant to starting to have an opinion on the things that were happening, right? And so I was publishing content saying I think that this story is interesting because of X, Y, and Z. And as I started to form that opinion, projects started to reach out to me and say, hey, how do you think that we should develop our community? How should we start to do governance? How should we start to think about different incentives that we have in place? And then that started to evolve into me actually contributing directly to those projects. And the reason that I highlight this is the first time when I started to build a very direct relationship with project founders. Because every project, for the most part, has a relationship with their community where they're in a Telegram chat, they're in a Discord. But what I noticed was the throughput for me was founders started to come to me to ask my opinions on how they should go about doing things.
Yeah.
And when that started to happen, I noticed that I was actually making valuable contributions. I was setting up governance forums, running grant committees, doing these different campaigns. And through that, it kind of felt like I went from being on the outside to the inside. And I just want to highlight that there was no financial thing that allowed me to do that. I was fresh out of college, I was broke, and I was just contributing my time and my energy. And I was very subject matter knowledgeable, you know? And so for people that are listening to this, I just want to highlight that before you think about investing or how to make money or how to be building a relationship, it's just like, if you take the time to really learn the inner workings of these ecosystems, like there's going to be a lot of opportunity for you. And I think a lot of the time people kind of stop at just like collecting a song, or they stop at just like kind of being an outside participant. For me, it was a very conscious decision to be like, I want to learn how this is working on the inside. And once I expressed and showed that interest, then I started to develop these relationships with these founders. And so over time, you know, these projects ended up doing well. Let's say that their tokens went up in value. Let's say that I bought a couple NFTs that went up in price. I started to have a little bit more personal capital, and then I started to think about investing. And what I started to notice here, and I'm really glad that you brought this up, venture capital is its whole own world. You know, like there's a certain set of etiquette that comes with it. There's a certain set of discipline around how do you go about fundraising? How do you make a pitch deck? And I won't get into that too deep in this conversation, but what I would say is that I'm noticing, and I'm really excited about, there's a lot of artists and a lot of people in music who are starting to ask a lot of the right questions around how to form capital. And I think that this is very important because historically in the music industry, there's been a record label who's offered you an advance, you sell your soul for 3 albums, and then you use that money to live for the next 10 years of your life. Yeah. You know, and the fact that we see things like, you know, Daniel Allen doing his seed round, or we see these other artists that are starting to explore new ways to bring on capital to their project. That to me is a really strong signal that artists are trying to challenge the system. And I would say the role that I want to play in that is having been lucky enough to play around in the venture capital world, you know, having a venture fund to invest in early stage founders. I'm now able to take that experience and help artists learn how to do that as well. Because I'm very optimistic that in the future, artists can go about raising capital the same way that an early stage tech company can. And the more we normalize those conversations, I think the healthier it's going to be for the ecosystem as a whole. Yeah, that's great. I mean, when you have these conversations with people like Sound or like SpinAmp or Mirror or NFT Now, for example, shout out NFT Now, what are your like goals in when you are the one basically asking for funding for your project, such as Invest in Music? It always changes by nature of what you're asking for money for. You know, like the way that I go about asking for a sponsorship for an event that we're doing is very different from a sponsorship from a newsletter, which is very different from an investment opportunity in a company. And the way that I like to think about this is the type of capital you're asking for is very dependent on what the outcomes of that investment are for. Yeah. And so, for example, when it comes to Invest in Music, we are looking for a sponsor to be able to get us off the ground, to pay people such as yourself to go and run this business. Now, is Invest in Music something that is being presented as a multi-billion-dollar tech software play that's going to, you know, reach trillions of users? Not necessarily. You know, I was very forward with people like NFT Now or Sound, who are some of our very early backers, of saying like, we want to be producing more content for this space, and we want to do it in a way that feels sustainable and feels enticing. And so when I'm going into those early conversations, it's something that I feel like is very important to recognize who you're talking to and why, and really just getting a gauge on like what amount of capital feels like it's not too big of an ask, but it allows you to at least have a little bit of runway to experiment and operate on these things. And speaking of experiments and stuff, can you go into the Invest in Music pass? Kind of things like that, or like, I don't know if that's an experimentation that's unique to Invest in Music, or if that's something that you've adopted from the culture itself. But why don't you run down how that works? Yeah, so the Invest in Music Pass is a collectible that allows you to join the Invest in Music chat. It gives you discounts to the different songs that we partner with. But more broadly, it's just a way to be a collector of our community at large. You know, the kind of backstory behind this is that I have a very long-standing relationship with a platform called Mirror, where we publish all of our content on. Shout out to Dennis. I think I was like maybe the 5th or 6th writer on Mirror in general, which was crazy at the time. And he's always just been very forward about new ways to fund writing and sort of like publishing in general. And they basically were launching what's called a subscriber NFT. And he came to me and he's like, hey, we're looking for some launch partners on this. I had told him that we were thinking about launching this thing called Invest in Music. We didn't have a launch date. And so we basically just ended up slapping it in the middle. And we said, we're going to launch Invest in Music the same day that Mirror debuts their subscriber NFT pass. And so it was extremely fortunate for us because, look, being very straightforward, bootstrapping capital to launch a media outlet in today's market is not easy. Doesn't matter who you are. And Mirror basically came to me and said, hey, you can launch this pass that allows people to get early access to your content, to join a collector chat, to get discounted mints, all these things that felt very like enticing to me, but do it through a partnered launch where Mirror is going to actually provide a spotlight to our outlet. And so being able to partner with them, we went live on day one. We ended up minting like 2,400 editions of the Invest in Music Pass. It was an open edition at 0.001 ETH. And so my intention with that was, what is the cheapest nominal price that we can launch a pass that says if you're remotely interested in on-chain music, you collect this pass just to signal that you have some interest in this outlet. And so the mint went way better than I expected. I remember going into it, talking to Sebastian and Michael the day before. I go, hey guys, if we get 100 mints, we should be really, really happy. You know, we're in a bear market. If we can get 1 ETH on this, we're going to be, you know, super, super grateful for it, etc. And I woke up the next day and we had like 1,500 mints or something with like 10 hours to go. And I just want to say that that was such a pivotal moment for launching this outlet, because we ended up raising, I think, 20 ETH through that initial subscriber NFT. And that became the backbone that allowed us to do a lot of things like fund this podcast, buy this really nice camera that we have here to be able to record it. And I would just say more broadly, the Investing Music Pass is kind of like the centerpiece to this whole ecosystem. And something that I think a lot about is if you are serious about on-chain music and you're serious about collecting, spending 0.01001 ETH to be able to collect this very, very cheap pass today that allows you to get a lot of these benefits in the ecosystem. I want to consistently drive value back to that. So after a year or two from now, when hopefully the space grows to tens and hundreds of thousands of collectors, the Invest in Music Pass is basically your way of saying, I am interested in music curation. I am interested in on-chain music. And what I hope comes on the back of that is that we can turn our collector chat into the hallmark place for curators to come and share their music. So if you want to talk about an artist that you're working with, if you want to talk about a campaign that you're running, we can hopefully have that as a hub to allow those conversations to happen in the first place.
Nice. And now thinking about that, like 0.001, making it insanely cheap to be able to be a part of the Invest in Music kind of community and stuff like that. I think one of the most common questions that I see in Web3 Twitter is, how do I value my stuff? How do I value the utility? How does that relationship coincide with each other? And I think that that's like common like Web3 theory that people are always like kind of like racking their brain over. Like, we're going to give the people just like a little bit of your taste or your, I guess, point of view or perspective on that, because I think a lot of people who are joining in and are new to this space, like they have no idea what to value their things. We've talked about it on the podcast before, but I think just, you know, right now you going over that quickly would be kind of helpful.
Yeah, I think that a lot of what your expectation for quote unquote utility should be highly dependent on the price that you pay for something. You know, in the case of something that costs $5, I think that you should set your mind accordingly that you are going to get at least $5 worth of value. You know, and so what that could look like is discounted mints on 10 songs and in aggregate add up to that. But it's really about just what you put into it. And I think what's nice about NFT collections is that they really just represent the strength of the community in general. And I think if you look at something like the Invest in Music Pass floor price, that floor price is going to be directly correlated to how strong our community is. So once we find our groove with the people we're talking to, with the people in our community, I think that that asset will rise in value. But I want to be really clear that I do not think that the right way to think about these things is to offer an endless suite of new benefits every time, because it's not a very correlated way to think about it. You know, and you commonly see, here's another airdrop, here's like another free NFT, etc. I'm way less concerned about that. I think that these assets represent the strength of the community. And I think that if we can do a good job at making people feel excited to be a part of that collector chat and they actually get value out of that, I think that the Invest in Music Pass will see its success in tandem. Nice.
We've got Invest in Music and what we're valued at for what we do. Can you kind of give a little bit of a background on our content strategy and how we're going to, I guess, provide value to what those people with the Music Pass have, in a sense?
Yeah. So to break down Invest in Music and what you should expect from us, we have Music Monday, which is where we cover up and coming songs that are happening that week, songs that were recently just minted in the past week, and then a selection of songs that were minted over the recent weeks. We have our spotlights, which is where we're picking 5 songs per week and we're giving them a little bit more shine just to say we really like this specific music. We have a podcast that drops every Thursday, and then we have a recap that drops every Friday. And I want to really take a moment to dive into this here because we are still figuring out what our content strategy looks like. It's something that I'm always looking for feedback on. And the reason that this is interesting is because when I was writing This Week in Music NFTs, it was 1 post per week. It was every Monday, and it covered songs, stories, bonus reads, basically everything we have now across all 5 series, but in like one very concise post. And when we launched Invest in Music, I saw this opportunity to really create the same culture that emerged around blogs, which is to say that we were giving coverage to individual songs. Like we were writing a new song that came out on Sound. We would write a 300-word article, say why we liked that song, what you should know about that artist. But I quickly noticed that it was just too much content. You know, and I think the thing that's really interesting about this space is you have to find the balance on like how much content do people actually want, but how much is too much to the point where you are overwhelming them and they're not going to be interested anymore because you're writing too much. And so basically, we just published a post last week called Rebranding Our Newsletter. Instead of sending out an email every single time we have a new post, which is Music Monday, Spotlight, Podcast, Recap, we're moving to a series where we're posting our Music Monday, Spotlight, and podcast just on Twitter only. And so we have a tweet storm that we write about that covers all the same topics. And then on Friday, we post on Mirror. and we have basically a recap of those 4 posts, and we send that out as an email. And so it's very funny to watch it come full circle where, you know, this week in music NFTs was 1 post per week. It was just every Monday. And if you looked at our open rates, it was like this and then straight down. And then next Monday, this and then straight down. Yeah. In my mind, I was thinking, how can we kind of have a more slowly and linear growth? But now I'm kind of realizing that there's a lot of merit in just sending someone one thing a week at the same time, and then being able to set aside time on their calendar to be like, hey, if I don't really care that much about on-chain music, I at least know that every Friday morning at 10 a.m. PST, I'm going to get a weekly recap, and I can read everything that happened that week in 5 minutes and go on with my life.
Yeah. Personally, what do you ingest the most content or things that you're trying to learn about? Do you like watching videos, or do you like reading? And do you think that value or that, preference has any merit on like how you invest in music and what we're doing here?
I learned the best from conversation, actually. Yeah. You know, like I've positioned myself in a place where I'm talking to a lot of project founders, a lot of artists on a regular basis. And I just learned the most from just like 30-minute Zoom calls to like really boil it down. But I would say like the most optimal place that I find content is just on Twitter. And it's not actually through like threads. Like I really don't read that many like long threads where I'm like reading post by post, etc. It's kind of the collective sum of the whole. You know, I think a lot of information is really dispelled by the people that you follow. And so I think being able to curate a good social graph, people who are very knowledgeable on the topics that they are interested in, that's what allowed crypto Twitter to become so popular in the first place. You know, there's like a DAO crypto Twitter, there's DeFi crypto Twitter, there's like, you know, music crypto Twitter, there's all these different topics. And I think that the best thing that you can do to learn new information is just like find the right people to follow, because once you follow those right people, you're going to get served up stuff that's directly for you. And that really is, at the end of the day, like the quote unquote alpha is just like what people are talking about on a day-to-day basis. Yeah.
And you mentioned that earlier about kind of like keeping up with the times and having to, I guess, match the energy and the timeline of Web3 as it's going on.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like the weight of that on your shoulders when you're trying to, I guess, expand and try new things, but also keep up with the ideas that are being talked about in real time?
Yeah, the on-chain music pivot has been very interesting to me, because to give an understanding here, there is a time and place when crypto Twitter was all just one thing.
Yeah.
There was not different segments. There was not different pockets. Everyone was just fully aligned that like crypto is this new thing and we're all in crypto together. And so when one thing would happen, everyone would be talking about it. It's been very challenging to take such a strong stance on how passionate I am about on-chain music, because the reality is that most of the world, and especially most of crypto Twitter, does not give a shit about on-chain music at all, you know? And so I would say for me, it's been very interesting to figure out how to navigate that. I would say the biggest thing that I struggle with is just the reality and the expectation that most of these things really don't make a big splash generally in the market. They only really make a splash in this very small pocket. And so I think for me, the hardest thing that I've struggled with is like, we write a weekly newsletter of top stories, quote unquote. Maybe there's not actually 5 stories that are super significantly relevant every single week, you know? Yeah. And I think it's kind of like this balance between how do we show that we are excited about the space and stay consistent in our coverage of it, but also kind of recognizing that maybe some of these things that are quote unquote top stories aren't like game changing, but we want to reward the consistency of the projects that are delivering on them. So it's just been a balance of trying to figure out how to accurately and authentically report on the growth and progress of the space, knowing that it is a very, very small ecosystem. Yeah. And there might not be as much happening when you're really zooming in to such a narrow pocket in space.
I think it's fair because of how small and narrow it is right now to be covering like multiple things, even if like on the grand scheme of things, it's not changing the landscape of Web3 in its entirety. But I think it's fair now, while it's a small community, to give the people shine, so that if people are tuning in now, they're seeing people who are getting started and being consistent. You know, like I don't think it hurts to, I think it's a good thing that you're, taking stories that may be smaller than the biggest one, the number 1 out of the 5. Number 5 may be smaller than that one, but it's still important that you're shining a light on it and kind of like showing that everything in the community is kind of involved while we still have the chance before it gets like ginormous, you know?
Well, I want to talk about the other side of this, because I agree with what you're saying. But what's been interesting to me is that I get a lot of pushback from people saying, oh, you're not covering X, Y, and Z, or why wasn't this featured, etc. The other thing that I think a lot about is all of the people who may end up coming into on-chain music through our outlet and what they think about the stories that we're presenting. Yeah. And to say this another way, let's imagine that I've been in crypto for 5 to 7 years. I've gone through the DeFi cycle. I've gone through the NFT cycle, etc. I'm only looking for like serious news. Like I don't want like all the fluff pieces. I don't want things that really aren't that relevant, etc. If I come across something that's presented as a top story and I see 5 things that are just not that interesting, I'm going to lose a lot of respect for that outlet's media coverage. And I'm not going to want to keep subscribing and listening because I don't feel like what they're reporting is actually significant enough for me to care about.
Yeah.
And so I think something that I try and balance is giving shine to everyone, especially the smaller people that are being consistent, is the number one most important thing. But I think what's interesting is how do you find the balance of trying to talk about everything that's happening, but curating such a direct feed of content so that someone who is new to the space feels like they're actually getting something of substance back and they're just not reading a bunch of fluff pieces every single week.
Yeah. And earlier you were talking about the balance between having too much content thrown in your face, but then we also have to have the balance of, I guess, like spreading the awareness to grab more people from the outside and give them the educational tools to kind of be able to fall into this community and learn about it. When you have things like we're doing things on the podcast, like making clips and stuff, we're holding back on being like, let's not put it on TikTok and Instagram yet. Let's kind of keep it to the community for now. What do you think that like balance is of like, you know, you don't want to force a horse to drink water or whatever. You can lead it, but it can't drink, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, do you value more making sure that you're keeping the integrity of the community within the community, or do you value like, let's spread the word and the gospel and kind of like put these clips out here for other people to see, and maybe they'll be like, what is he talking about? And then click on it and then be like, oh, maybe I should get into NFTs.
Come really full circle on it, man. I mean, when we launched Invest in Music, I think that my ambition was if I change this from a weekly newsletter that I write once a week to a full organization that has a team behind it that's doing multi-hyphenated content, that we could reach a much larger audience.
Yeah.
Now I realize that the more you try and sell something and the more you stand on a fucking pedestal and you shout to the rooftops about how great the future of music is and blockchain technology, you just turn people off, man.
Yeah.
You know, you really do. And so I think for me at this point in time, it's being comfortable with staying in your own lane. You know, it's recognizing that I am uniquely very passionate about this space. There are a lot of people who are uniquely passionate about this space, but in the grand scheme of things, it's still no one, you know? And I think what that's going to look like is we need to take a year plus, 2 years plus to really develop an organic culture and community here. There needs to be artists of high quality and of high caliber that get people to care about it. And if we do a good job of that, people are going to pay attention because that's what happens every time. And if we just try and shout that this is the future of music without anything that can substantially back that up, it's always going to be a turnoff. And so I actually don't worry too much about needing to push that narrative and get it into the hands of more people. What I care more about now is like, let's authentically document what's going on here. Let's give people the opportunity to really tell their stories in a very true and organic manner. And if these people are doing things that are significant enough, that will break through because that's just how the world and how the algorithms work. So it's really just a repetition game into finding like what is that through line and what is that secret sauce that can connect with the wider audience without us pushing it on them in the first place.
And for the people listening who are either new and this is their first experience with us, or maybe you are a frequent listener but you've missed a couple, as the creator, are there any articles or podcasts that you would like recommend to any listeners that maybe they have not tapped into?
That's right. I love that question. We got a couple quick hits for you. I got a couple key articles that I recommend reading. So the Invest in Music OG post that we launched, which was launching and introducing the outlet, talks a lot about why we launched this in the first place. It has some links to that Invest in Music pass and why we launched that. It talks about our intentions. I think that that's a really good way just to get fully aware of like what is the goal of what we're doing here. I think that's a really good starting point. We have an article called the Collector Starter Pack, and this is basically an article where we cover 5 different artists and 5 collections that I think are very important for you to look into as someone who's new to collecting on-chain music. You know, to give some context there, if you go onto Sound XYZ today, hundreds of songs, hundreds of artists, it can be very overwhelming to get started. And something that we want to do as an outlet is give you an easier on-ramp into getting started with collecting. So we have an article called Collector Starter Pack that I think is very valuable. We have a Getting Started on Optimism article, which I think is very important. So as many of you may know, Sound is on Optimism now. This is where a lot of the different activity is happening. And for someone who's not really aware of what that means or how to navigate it, just going in and learning a little bit more about what Optimism is and how to move around that ecosystem is very valuable. Last one I would call out there is we did some coverage on a project called Modern Romance by a friend of ours named Bloody White. It's very much like a classic Invest in Music article where we really took the time to thoughtfully lay out like why that project was significant. You know, we had Bloody on the podcast, he gave his background, and then we really covered that project from front to back. You know, we did some coverage of each song, and the reason why that one's important is because it's very music oriented. You know, in the spirit of the Lyrical Lemonades of the world of This Song Is 6, that was an article that was very much written in that sort of tone and landscape. And I think being able to recognize the difference from a highly educational Get Started with Optimism article from a very curated, here's a starter pack from a bunch of different artists, to a very pointed Modern Romance article with Bloody White. I think that if you were to read those 5 articles, that would give you a very full spectrum of what we cover here on Invest in Music from the writing side.
Yeah, that's dope. And touching on Bloody, it's interesting to see how different artists use their utility and their space in the Web3 community. Like you have someone like Bloody who's pretty open about being like, you fuck the utility, like I just want to make art and like my art's gonna stand for itself and like you guys can support me if you want in a more like GoFundMe kind of way. And then there's like people who are trying to curate like an entire business out of the, you know, way that they're getting funding for their music and using music NFTs as the face of it. And so there's like different ways that people can do it. There's no like really right answer. You know what I mean? Is there anything you want to like touch or examples on that?
Well, I would just highlight that you said something important there was that there's a specific demographic of artists who are really making music NFTs the front and center of their artist project, you know? And I think that that's so important to touch on because when I think about what on-chain music embodies, I don't expect the artists are only going to release their music on chain. You know, I think that all artists want their music to be heard and I want it to be heard by as many people as possible. But I think that there's a difference between wanting your music to be heard by as many people as possible and saying that you want to do that by making the on-chain music space sort of your home base, you know, because when you bring people into that world, it's what we were talking about with pushing content on people, right? It's like if you're going and you're screaming from the rooftops on TikTok, like, hey, I'm a music NFT artist, it's going to turn people off. But if you just happen to have your best music on chain and you're a great artist and people come here to discover it, they're going to have a very different relationship with you as an artist. And I think that that's so important to highlight because especially in today's world, everyone's looking for an edge. You know what I mean? And if your strategy is just to go viral on TikTok or to land an editorial playlist on Spotify, with all due respect, that's really not going to get you that far. You know, and I think that for the artists that are really taking the time to internalize what it means to be a part of this space and being very authentic about what that consists of, you know, down to saying fuck the utility and everything like that, that commentary is the things that really cements what it means to be on chain right now. And I just want to highlight that we as Invest in Music are extremely passionate about those artists because I think it really tells an accurate representation of what this space will look like over the course of the next 3, 5, 10 years.
Yeah. And where do you see Invest in Music going over in the next 3, 5, 10 years, or maybe just in the next year in general?
Yeah, I would say we're really passionate about being able to provide accurate data representation for on-chain music. You know, right now we've started as a very editorial focused outlet. We're talking about a song that just came out this week, a story that just got posted. I'm very interested in things like on-chain earnings, you know, being able to say how many collectors does this artist have, how many songs they have on chain, how many additions they have as their total supply. And if we zoom out a bit, I think that we're really excited about this idea of what artist dashboards could look like, which is to say we want to create a portal where you can go and learn about Bloody White and see all of his catalog from front to back. You can see that he's minted this many songs on catalog, this many songs on sound. You know, he's done the Modern Romance collection, which did this much in ETH, it had this many collectors. And if you start to think about on-chain data as like the backbone for what like artist baseball cards could look like, I think that there's a really awesome opportunity for us to create a portal or a place where people can go a lot deeper on the stats around musicians versus just like, I like this artist. I think that there's quite a lot of people, specifically collectors, who would be very interested in like analyzing the different stats there and using that to make more informed decisions about what they're collecting.
Yeah. And I think, you know, your initial worry of like giving the people too much information, I guess that's like kind of only stems from giving too much information that is like advertised, but you can like build this archive of like a wiki basically, you know, and I think that's really important because if someone wants to do the deep dive, you know, say they're not even on the email list or following you guys, but then they happen to come across your website and are able to dive in and say, what is this? And you guys already have all of the information that you've laid out for the past, you know, 5 years or whatever it's been, you know, it's like, that's going to be a very useful tool for people to be able to like research and think about these things and just learn more and kind of nerd out, you know?
Yeah. And especially making that public. I think that's something that's really important because you have tools like Spotify for artists right now. But if I wanted to go in and say like, what's DEEGAN's overall streaming across all of his music, you know, or how does his music stream from January to March of this year, like those are very difficult things to query and pull from. And so I think us just giving a little bit more of a transparent outlet for people to go deeper on the artists that they love would be very important. And I think that's actually a pretty good segue into the Invest in Music team. You know, I want to talk a little bit more about like who's involved in this project behind the scenes. So I mentioned at the top of this podcast, we have Sebastian, who's kind of the day-to-day operator of Invest in Music. Funny story about Sebastian is that me and him met originally through writing together during DeFi Summer in 2019. Yeah, we were writing a publication with DeFi Pulse. We had an outlet called Alpha Tractor and DeFi Farmer, and basically there was this whole yield farming thing that was happening. And Sebastian and I were working together on publishing content about what projects to look into, what yield farming pools to pay attention to, etc. We ended up writing together across outlets like, you know, the Defiant, Bankless, etc., some other ones. But it was a really full circle moment because I had been in contact with Sebastian for many years after the fact. And he was talking to me about hey, I'm at this project currently, but I really love music. I see what you're doing here and I really love music and I want to figure out what to do. So I found it very fortunate that me and him could find a new way to work together in the formation of Invest in Music. And I really just want to give him a lot of shout out here, because he's really the one who's keeping the lights on a day-to-day basis and making sure that everything's kind of going out across the board and really just kind of like running the ships. And I think that he's just such a incredible member of the team, because not only is he very professional, but he fucking loves music.
Yeah.
You see this guy at a show, like he is raging, he is dancing, he's fully into it. And I think the one throughput I have of everyone that's on the Invest in Music team is we all fucking love music. Like there's no denying that. You know what I mean?
100%. I mean, Sebastian has been an absolute pleasure to work with, always bringing the good spirits, always like, he's the heart and soul, I feel like, of the whole operation. It really is. Yeah. It's so apparent. And how like welcome he makes all of the other people feel. It's always, heart emojis and blush emojis. And we're all like, I don't know. He makes it feel like a family for sure.
That's right.
Yeah.
I want to give a quick shout out to the Wonder Kid, Michael.
Yeah.
Michael DeVistia. Michael is such an interesting story because he came onto my radar through a talk that Daniel Allen and David Greenstein did at Syracuse, where they went and spoke to the university, and they were like just talking to all the kids there. And then this kid came up to David and was like, hey, like I've collected 20 things on sound or something like that. And I remember Daniel FaceTimed me and was like, I'm with this guy in college who's collected 10 of my songs or something like that. And then I just noticed Michael just showing up every day. And for context, Michael is the one who is publishing all of the posts that you see. So all of our tweets, all of our different posts on Mirror. He's really the writer and the editor that's getting all of the written content out the door. And I've been so impressed by his journey because it reminds me so much of exactly what I was doing during DeFi summer. When I told you about writing This Week in Music NFTs and for the Define and Bankless and whatnot, Michael has just been so consistent in his awareness of the space that he is just like really tapped in. Like there's never a moment when I need to say to him, let's focus on these type of artists or this type of music, etc. He's just in the weeds every single day. You know what I mean? And I think that that's so important to highlight.
I know. He's so organized, and I feel like, I don't know, he's the type of, I feel like if we were in college together, I'd be like, please let me copy your homework.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, and Michael's actually going to be spending some time out here in LA over the next couple of months doing an internship, getting deeper into the whole on-chain music world, doing some work for Daniel and Invest in Music and whatnot. So yeah, shout out Michael. He's just been a killer so far.
Yeah, so happy for him, and he deserves everything coming for him.
That's right. Yeah. And then we got yourself, DEEGAN, obviously, who we talked about at the start of the podcast, but your relationship with Invest in Music was really, really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I had been doing like Web3 music NFTs with Daniel and the whole crew, and I basically was able to fund myself from moving across the country from Connecticut to California, which was like a dream of mine for the past 2 years. I was able to fund all of that through Web3 and make a dream for myself. Come out here and survive like my first 6 months off of Web3 and music NFTs. And then I was kind of going through a little bit of a creative dry spell, and I just needed more. I wanted to have something that was consistent. And I went to dinner with you and Rio, and shout out Rio. And I was like, I don't know, like I love making content. I want a job. I want to be doing something that's using a different part of my brain. And you guys were both like, bro, just wear a different hat, like do something else, like, have that part of your brain exercise, because when you're more busy, you're going to be better at doing the things that you love to do because your brain's able to compartmentalize it. And I was like, you guys like opened up my mind and just like were total role models in that moment. I was like, holy shit. So ended up asking you, I was like, do you need help with the podcast? Like, I've experienced video editing, audio engineering, like I just need something. And you were like, open arms, welcome me in, like no question. And I just want to thank you for letting me on the team. And it's been like, of course, it's been absolutely so beneficial just for mental health and everything. Just like, having something else to be able to be a part of something. And I was like, I feel like I'm more of a team player. Like I'm kind of going crazy just doing this artist thing on my own. Some people have like the personality for it, but to just have something where I feel like I have a community and like, a sense of, like making something happen, it's been really fun. And it's been good practice too, just like being able to have that my video shit on key, because it'd been a couple of years since I was editing. So
100%. And the timing was literally perfect. So for context here, episodes, I can't remember what episode it was exactly when you joined. I know it was very early on, but it's like 5. Yeah, 5. So before episode 5, we had Robert, who works with me on Coop Records, shooting an episode or two. Not a video guy. I love you, Robert, if you're listening to this, but like I remember totally botched one of the episodes. Bloody recorded like one of the episodes,
Wow.
you know, and I remember like I was just doing anything I could because I was trying to figure out how to make it work. And I always felt so guilty just asking people to come and film out of like their own time. Like I was really looking for someone to be like an editor,
Yeah.
but I didn't really know how to find that. And I remember even when me and you started working together, it was such a great ask because I needed that so badly, but I was so sensitive about asking my artist friends to do something that was not directly creative. You know what I mean? And I think that you were so open to saying, I'm excited by this opportunity. You know, you've really taken on doing the video editing and doing the clip editing, just like really on the chest. And it's been such a crucial part of this because us sitting in front of this camera and talking for an hour straight is one thing. You taking this content and chopping it up into these short bite-sized contents that we can share on Twitter and, you know, really just service a different form of our content has been so essential that, yeah, it's really just become like a very pivotal role of this, you know, outlet as a whole.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Yeah. And the other perfect thing I even forgot to mention was I was trying to start and make podcasts for other people at that exact time. One of them fell through. He was like, I'm too busy now, but maybe in the next year or so we'll do that. And then the other one was my personal podcast, which was going to be like a comedy thing. And so I already made like 2 or 3 episodes that we hadn't released yet and interviewed people like Bloody and Daniel and Nat. And so I had already kind of had a little bit of that going on, but to have it like not be all about me and that is kind of like the perfect thing where I was like, oh, I want to do this, but it's like, I don't know. It's just perfect timing. Exactly.
Yeah. So shout out our future content strategy. We got some cool stuff in the works there. And I think on the topic of like being a team player and organization, I want to give a quick shout out to Hannah, who's been helping us out. Yeah. She's been amazing at just kind of keeping everything really organized. You know, as I mentioned, we have Music Monday, we got Spotlight, we got podcasts, we're doing Twitter Spaces, we got the weekly recap, and she's just been such a great team player of just organizing all of our links, you know, running that Notion board, making sure that everything's getting done on time. And I really just am coming to realize the importance of just having someone on the like project management side, just like making sure the very small things get done, that this banner gets edited, that this tweet gets posted, etc. And so she's just been a really vital glue. And Hannah's an incredible music fan herself. That's how I actually met her here in LA. And I feel like in a lot of ways, our team has just become a very natural progression of all these people that are excited about on-chain music, and they're just looking for some way to spend some more time in like the music industry at large. And I've been very fortunate to allow Invest in Music to be this outlet where we can kind of come together and just figure out what does an on-chain media organization look like, you know?
Yeah. Do you want to wrap it up into whatever we've got into the next chapter and what, you know, is in store for you?
Yeah, I'll give also one last shout out to IndieDAO, who's been our insane design partner. So IndieDAO helped us design the logo for Invest in Music. They helped to create our branding guide for us. So when you see our cover arts from the podcast episode templates to the newsletter templates to just any design assets you might see, that was all designed by IndieDAO. Nice. And so I want to give them a huge shout out because they are phenomenal designers. I care a ton about brand. Like I think a lot about our logo, the colors associated with it. Like that was a very big brand exercise for us. So definitely just want to give a huge shout out to IndieDAO for getting us to the place we are today. But to your point about sort of next chapter and what's coming down the pipeline, I talked a little bit about artist dashboards. You know, I think that's something we're going to start to experiment with a little bit more. There's a spectrum here of like, if the North Star is you go and you find this fully immersive artist dashboard experience where you can type in any artist and find their stats from their 10th song, etc. That's the North Star. And so what this looks like in the short term is we're going to be rolling out a little bit more of artist stats, let's call it. We're going to be rolling out like these kind of baseball card-esque type profiles where we show an artist and their different stats they have to date, and really just experimenting with a very lightweight version of that. But what I would say, if you are listening to this and you want to learn more about specific artists, we would love to hear what kind of information would be valuable. You know, like what are the things that you would find out of different artist cards that you would find of use to yourself? And what I would say the second thing is to keep in mind is that we've talked a lot about Optimism, the Optimism grant program, etc. We submitted a grant recently and it's not approved yet, so I'm not going to cross my fingers too tight here, for a curator program. And so we basically want to try and create a system where we can reward people for coming and being curators in the on-chain music ecosystem. And so the grant that we submitted to Optimism was basically every month we hold a curator competition, you know, whoever refers the most songs, whoever refers the most unique artists, etc., and just giving rewards to people for being curators. And so that's something that I feel very passionate about, you know, just to kind of round that all together. We want Invest in Music to be the home for curators. We want people who are very passionate about discovering music, who are passionate about breaking new songs and new artists to really have a home. And so a lot of what we're doing is focusing on that. And, you know, I think it's important that we just take this time just to take a step back and just like appreciate how far we've come. You know, like obviously we still have a lot to do, but I'm extremely thankful for it. I'm a huge proponent of consistency and discipline. And the fact that we have 20 weeks under our belt is pretty crazy. And I just know that with the team that we've got in pocket here, we're in a really good position. So stoked for, Invest in Music quarterly recap number 1, let's call it.
Yeah. Is this where you want to wrap it up, or do you have anything else you want to talk about, mention?
I'll just say in the more esoteric closing thoughts here that if anyone is listening to this at this point in time, thank you so much. It does not go unnoticed. This is something that I put a lot of time and effort into, and it means a ton to me. When I hear that people are taking an hour out of their day to listen to episodes like this, it blows my mind, and I don't take any of that for granted. Just sharing a little bit of personal insight. It's been very interesting for me to learn how to move in this space, diving into something as niche as on-chain music, having this crazy Twitter run up with NFTs and this whole fucking crypto bull market, to now like finding this pocket that's very passionate to me, but not really valued or appreciated by the world at large, And so I'm just very thankful that I get to work with my friends every day, people like DEEGAN who are incredible. And every single one of you who are listening goes such a long way. So thank you so much. I know that we've got a long way to go, but we're here for it. And I'm excited to see what comes down the pipeline next.
Woo! Congrats. And thanks to everyone for listening. I'm stuttering now because, gosh, that was just tearing me up. It's so beautiful. I
love it.
Yeah.
Well, Invest in Music quarterly recap. Thank you guys so much. And we will see you again next week.
Peace with love.